The Great Library of Alexandria.
Yeah.
It's like you hear that name and just picture, I don't know, towering shelves packed with ancient scrolls, right? This whole world of knowledge, and then poof, gone in some giant fire.
Yeah, it really captures the imagination, doesn't it?
Totally.
Yeah.
But today we're going to try to sort out, what really happened separate, like the fact from the fiction.
Yeah.
And we're using this academic paper, The Great Library of Alexandria. It's got a question mark.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like they're not even sure about the name. But anyway, it's a good starting point for our deep dive.
Definitely. It's a place that, even after all these centuries, people are still so fascinated by.
For sure. And I think we got to start with like the setting. Picture Alexandria. This incredible city founded by Alexander the Great, right at the crossroads of like the whole Mediterranean world.
It was a true melting pot. Cultures, trade, everything. And the Ptolemies, the dynasty that ruled Egypt after Alexander, they wanted to make it the intellectual center of their empire. So that's where the Great Library comes in.
Okay, so the Ptolemies had this like huge ambition, right? They wanted to build this universal library, a place with every book in the world. Was that even like remotely possible back then?
It was certainly ambitious, to say the least. I mean, even with all the resources of an empire, probably impossible. But it shows you something about how they thought, how seriously they took the pursuit of knowledge.
And they weren't afraid to bend the rules a little to get those books. I read about them like they'd borrow scrolls from Athens and then just kind of never give them back.
Ah, yes, the famous story of the Athenian originals. They paid a big deposit, supposedly to borrow them, made copies, and then just kept the originals.
Clever,
Right.
but sneaky.
Yeah.
So what other tactics did they use to, build their collection?
Imagine this. You're a merchant. You're sailing into Alexandria. The harbor's bustling, right?
Yeah.
Your ship is full of goods, scrolls, manuscripts, everything. And before you can even dock, royal officials, they board your ship and they take all your scrolls.
Whoa, talk about a book collecting pirate crew. They weren't messing around. But okay, you've got all these scrolls. How do you even keep track? You need a system, right? A serious system.
You're right. And that's where the brilliance of, the librarians comes in. Zenodotus, the first head librarian, had this huge job organizing this massive and always growing collection.
So what was his system like? Anything like what we're used to today?
Well, get this. Zenodotus arranged the scrolls alphabetically by author, which, believe it or not, was revolutionary for the time. Imagine trying to find anything without alphabetical order.
It seems so obvious now, but back then that was cutting edge stuff. Okay, so Zenodotus gets things going, but I'm guessing other people, helped shape the library too.
Oh, absolutely. As the library grew and grew, they needed more complex systems, and that's where Callimachus comes in. He was a poet, scholar, and a truly brilliant librarian. He took what Zenodotus did and took it even further.
Okay, so what did Callimachus bring to the table?
Well, he created a much more detailed system. He categorized works by genre. So first you've got poetry, history, whatever. And then within each genre, he arranged the scrolls alphabetically by author. And he also created this amazing document. Think of it like an early library catalog. This catalog, it was called the Penakes, a 120-scroll document listing all the library's holdings with, get this, biographical information about each author. It was really groundbreaking stuff.
So he basically invented the library catalog as we know it. Wow, these early librarians, they were really on top of things.
They were, and it makes you think, does the Great Library even fit how we think about libraries today, or was it more of a massive archive?
Good question. So what are the, defining things that make something a library?
Well, I'd say there are 4 main things to look at. First, you need a collection, obviously. Then you need a way to organize that collection. Then there's got to be a way to maintain it. And finally, you've got to have a group of people who are actually using it, the patrons, right? And if you look at the Great Library, it really seems to check all those boxes.
Okay. Yeah, we talked about the collection and the organization. And I'm sure they had ways to, take care of all those delicate scrolls. But who were the patrons? Who got to use this incredible resource? It was probably just like a select few, right?
That's where it gets even more interesting. It wasn't just for the elite. The main library was actually part of this place called the Mausoleum. Think of it like a research institute, a place where scholars from all over the Mediterranean world could come together. They had lecture halls, laboratories, even living quarters for the scholars who lived there.
So like a university campus, but with a way better library.
Exactly. But here's what's fascinating. There was another branch of the Great Library, housed in a separate building called the Serapeum.
The Serapeum. What was that all about?
It was a temple dedicated to this god Serapis, a kind of combination of Greek and Egyptian deities. And inside this temple, they had a library, and it was open to the public.
Wait, a public library? In ancient Alexandria? I had no idea. So it wasn't just this exclusive club for scholars.
Apparently not. And that's one of the things that makes the Great Library so fascinating. It challenges our assumptions about like what libraries were in the ancient world. Maybe there was, at least some understanding of how important it is to make knowledge accessible to everyone.
That's amazing. So you have this public library in the Serapeum and this more exclusive research library in the Mousarium. But were they like connected in any way? Would the average person browsing the shelves in the Serapeum even know about the research going on just a short distance away?
That's a great question. I mean, we can't know for sure what the average person thought about those scholars, but we can explore those connections, between these two branches of the library. It's interesting, right? The Motion and the Serapeum, they were separate, but also kind of part of the same like intellectual world.
Yeah.
You've got the Motion with all these scholars and their research, and it's this like center of knowledge creation.
So we've got these brilliant minds all in one place, surrounded by scrolls, doing experiments, debating philosophy, like pushing the limits of knowledge.
Exactly. And I mean, think about Euclid's Elements, that book that like laid out all the basics of geometry, the stuff about points and lines and angles. We all learned it in school. It was
Yeah.
written right there in the Motion.
So like the concepts that we just take for granted today, they were figuring it all out back then at the Great Library. That's wild.
It really is. It shows you how much influence the Great Library had on the development of like math and, Western thought in general. It wasn't just about holding on to old knowledge. It was about making new knowledge.
That's so cool. What other like groundbreaking stuff came out of the Mount Syrian? Give me another example.
Okay, how about Eratosthenes? He was another scholar there. And get this, he calculated the circumference of the Earth, and he was remarkably accurate.
Wait, he figured out the size of the Earth. Back then, how do you even do that without, satellites and all our fancy technology?
He used basically simple tools, shadows, geometry, things like that. It just shows you like how smart he was, the power of observation, critical thinking. And the Great Library gave him, the environment, the resources to make these breakthroughs.
It makes you realize, like, we owe a lot to these ancient scholars. They were setting the stage for, so much of what we know today. Okay, so we've got the Serapeum, open to the public, the Mousicon, with all this amazing intellectual energy. Sounds like the Great Library was, at its peak. But of course, nothing good lasts forever.
Right. Unfortunately, that's true. Even when it was at its best, there are already signs of, like, trouble brewing.
Really? What kind of challenges were they up against?
Well, remember those aggressive tactics the Ptolemies used to get their books?
Yeah, the borrowing and not returning.
Right. They made some enemies along the way.
Yeah, I bet those Athenian scholars weren't too thrilled about their scrolls being permanently borrowed.
Exactly. And then there was just the huge cost of, like, running such a big place. The library needed the support of the Ptolemies, royal patronage,
Yeah.
which meant that the library's fate was tied to, well, the Ptolemies' political fortunes.
So like when the Ptolemies were doing well, the library did well. But when they struggled, the library struggled too.
That's exactly it. And you can see how this plays out over time as, the political scene changed and the Roman Empire started to dominate the Mediterranean.
Oh, right. The Romans. What did they do? Did they support the Great Library?
It's complicated. Some Roman emperors, they really admired Alexandria's intellectual legacy, like Julius Caesar, for example,
Uh-huh.
but others, not so much. And the library's funding, it became less and less reliable.
So even with the Romans in charge, the library still had problems.
Hmm.
What about those stories we hear about fires and riots and stuff? Did any of that actually happen?
Yes. Several things happened that damaged the library. There was a fire during Caesar's siege of Alexandria, and then later on, the city was sacked by Emperor Aurelian. Those events definitely had an impact on the library.
But wasn't there a lot of like religious conflict in Alexandria around that time too? Didn't that affect the library?
You're thinking about the rise of Christianity, right? And all that tension between pagan beliefs and Christian beliefs.
Right, right. And the Serapeum, it was a pagan temple. So as Christianity became more powerful, wouldn't that make the Serapeum and its library kind of a target?
You're getting it. In 391 CE, there were riots led by Bishop Theophilus, and the Serapeum was destroyed.
Wow. That's a huge turning point. The Serapeum with its public library, gone. That must have been a major setback for, making knowledge accessible to people in Alexandria. But what about the Mausoleum? Did that survive?
It did, for a while anyway, but its funding got cut and, its golden age was over. Then, in the 7th century CE, the Arabs conquered Egypt, and that brought a whole new set of changes to Alexandria.
Didn't I read something about, like, the Arabs burning all the books to heat the bathhouses? Is that true?
That's a story you hear a lot, but most historians think it's, well, probably more myth than reality. The account we have of that event, it comes from, like, centuries later, so probably not very reliable.
So no big dramatic book burning.
Yeah.
Okay, that's something. But it still sounds like the Great Library, faded away pretty sadly.
It's a good reminder that even the greatest institutions, they're not immune to the forces of history. The decline of the Great Library, it wasn't just one big event. It was a slow process, lots of factors involved, political, economic, cultural, all of it.
It's kind of a sad story. But I feel like there's, more to it than that. Why should we care about a library that disappeared so long ago? What can we learn from it today?
It really does make you think, doesn't it? I mean, the story of the Great Library, it reminds us that knowledge, it's precious, but it's also kind of fragile.
Yeah, for sure. It's a cautionary tale. But I don't know, I also feel like there's something hopeful about it too.
You're right. I mean, the Great Library might be gone, but it's not like its legacy is gone. It still, inspires us. This idea of a world where knowledge is valued, where people want to learn and share what they learn.
Okay, I like that. So it's not about, like, being sad about a lost library. It's about learning from it, what they did right, what went wrong.
Exactly. So, like, what can we learn from the things they did well? Well, for one, it shows the power of, collaboration. Think about all those scholars in the Mausoleum from all these different backgrounds coming together, sharing ideas, pushing each other to think differently.
It's a good model for, like, intellectual collaboration. Even today, we need spaces where people can come together, have real conversations, challenge each other, and come up with new ideas.
I completely agree. And the Great Library, it also reminds us about accessibility. It wasn't just like a private club for a few lucky people. They had the Serapeum, the public library, for the whole community.
That's a really important point because we think of public libraries as this, like, modern thing. But the idea, it goes all the way back to Alexandria.
Exactly. And that idea, making knowledge available to everyone, it's something we have to hold on to, especially now in the digital age.
Yeah, especially now with so much information out there. But it's also, like, all over the place. We have to find ways to make sure everyone can access, good information, reliable, accurate, and from different perspectives. Okay, so we've talked about collaboration, accessibility. What else can we learn from the Great Library?
I think it reminds us that knowledge, it's not like this fixed thing. It changes, it grows. It's not just about preserving what we already know. It's also about, like, pushing the boundaries, discovering new things.
Right, like Euclid and Eratosthenes and all the amazing stuff that came out of the Mausoleum. But how did the library itself, help with that, with making those discoveries?
Well, they gave the scholars what they needed to do research, not just scrolls, but like laboratories, places to study the stars, even botanical gardens. It was a place that encouraged people to, be curious, to experiment, to innovate.
It sounds incredible. What do you think? If the Great Library had survived, how would it have changed history?
That's a fascinating question. Imagine if they'd been able to preserve that whole collection, if that spirit of, like, always wanting to learn more, if that had continued. Would science and technology be more advanced? Would we understand the world better? Who knows? It's impossible to say, but it's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what was lost, what we could have achieved. But I guess instead of focusing on what might have been, we can focus on, what we can do now. How can we carry on the spirit of the Great Library?
Exactly. Every time we, try to learn something new or have a real conversation about something important or share what we've learned with others, that keeps that spirit alive.
It's like we can all help build a new Great Library, something global, a network of knowledge and collaboration that goes beyond, physical walls.
I like that. The Great Library, it might be gone, but its ideas, they're still relevant today.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. It's amazing how a library from, like, thousands of years ago can still teach us so much.
Yeah.
About knowledge and the challenges we face today.
It really is. It shows us that knowledge, it's powerful, and we have to use it wisely.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Great Library of Alexandria. We hope you've, been inspired to keep learning, to seek out new perspectives, and to be part of the conversation about knowledge and how it shapes our world.